Hello and welcome to This Is How We Care, a podcast that's imagining what kind of world our children want to inherit and how we, the village raising them, can embody that world. I'm your host, Emily Race Newmark. Thank you so much for being here for this episode with Victoria Barendsen. I am so excited to share this with you, although I will admit that I had a little bit of resistance to getting this episode done because the topic itself is one of those trickier topics. That said, when I finally sat down to edit it back and release it for you, I was reminded of how accessible Victoria makes this conversation. What could we be talking about, you may wonder? Well, if you already clicked on the episode, you probably have a sense. But in this conversation, we are going to be looking at body safety for children. And unfortunately, we're in a time when this is one of those conversations that feels more important to have than ever, but also feels so challenging because so many of us were raised in a generation where we weren't actually given the languaging or the experiences or the tools to have these conversations with ease because there was shame or so much taboo or mystery around our bodies and really not a lot of modeling around what it means to have the ultimate say on what happens to our bodies. So we're going to get into all of this in our conversation with Victoria today. Victoria is a registered psychologist. She has over 8 years of experience, including the past 5 in a private practice where she's supported families through some of the most tender and challenging moments of parenting. She specializes in trauma and is also a mother of 2 who's walking this journey right alongside the parents she works with. Her greatest passion lies in prevention through equipping parents to raise safe, empowered children by making body safety a natural part of everyday life. She helps families confidently integrate these essential conversations into their everyday routines so that body safety is a trusted, ongoing dialogue rather than a one-off or uncomfortable talk. Victoria believes the most effective prevention begins early through simple language, everyday connection, and consistent messages that build trust and understanding from the start. I can't wait for you to hear what Victoria has to say, but I want you to listen to this episode with one thing in mind. If this speaks to you, if you feel like this conversation was helpful, please consider sharing it with the other people in your village, your partner in parenting, your aunties, your uncles, your grandparents, because through the sharing of this conversation, we start to normalize it. If you haven't yet subscribed to This Is How We Care on YouTube, make sure you do that now, because we will also be releasing some smaller bite-sized clips that will make it even easier for you to share this conversation with the people in your life without them needing to get over the barrier of listening to a full hour-long episode. All right, that's enough from me for now. I'm going to hand it over to Victoria. Thanks so much for being here, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Hello and welcome. I am here with Victoria, and I'm so excited to have this conversation. As a mother, I feel like thinking about how to pass on to our children like a sense of bodily empowerment and a feeling of safety that comes from within is so important and not necessarily something I learned myself from a young age. So Victoria, thank you for being here. We cannot wait for this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so passionate about this topic, and when I have spaces where I can talk about it openly, I feel forever grateful. So thank you for having me.
Do you mind just kind of introducing yourself by way of a story and really how you got into this work that you're doing in the world?
Yeah, of course. So, yes, I'm Victoria. I am a psychologist and I specialize in sexual abuse prevention. And at the moment, I run an online platform called the Safe Kids Project, which is just my space to share my mission around keeping children safe and encouraging and empowering them to learn about their body. And the way that I got into this has been quite a journey. I've worked with children my sort of entire career. I've been a psychologist now for 8 years, and I've worked in various fields in education and then more recently into trauma. And I worked in a non-for-profit organization for quite a long time that worked with children and young people who had engaged in harmful sexual behavior towards other children. And that was like my introduction into this work. And I've always felt really privileged to do the work. A lot of people will question how you can do it. But my true belief is, children don't hurt other children out of maliciousness. There is often so much stuff that sits underneath it. So I started working in that space, and that naturally led to me then also working with children that had been harmed and had experienced sexual abuse as well as their families. And so that's sort of where my career was, and I was really, really enjoying it. I moved into private practice as well. And yeah, I feel so grateful to hold the space that I get to hold for people's healing journeys, and particularly for young people. It's an area that not a lot of people want to work in. It feels really scary and overwhelming. And of course, there's aspects of it that are really challenging. But for me, it's such a beautiful space to work in. And the story of how I shifted my work into more prevention was I was working with a young boy. He was around 14, 15, and he had been sexually abused himself. And then he actually went on to harm his siblings. And we were working together. And this, of course, was nothing new to me. I'd done this work a lot. But he told me about a young girl he'd met online on Snapchat. And then he told me what his intentions were with her. And I just froze. Like, in the moment, I felt really sick to my stomach. And it was all because I was pregnant with my first baby. And it was just like this complete shift in me, that I wasn't just a psychologist holding therapeutic space for healing and growth, but I also had somebody that I needed to protect. And so I remember driving home that night, and I thought to myself, like, how am I bringing a baby into this world? How do I keep my child safe? This could be my child that this person harmed. And so I just made it a mission of mine to ensure that my child had every resource and skill to keep their body safe. And I went on quite a big journey of reading, researching, talking to colleagues and other people in this space. And my husband, he doesn't work in this field. So it was like educating him through it as well.
Right.
And one day he said to me, you have to share this information. Like, we can't just keep it in our family. And I was like, that's so true. And that was with my first baby. And I found new motherhood quite challenging, and so didn't have capacity for it then. But after my second, decided that I'm going to do this. Like, I really want to share this knowledge. And the best way I knew how was social media. Social media is not natural to me. Speaking with people, like speaking to a camera, is not natural to me. But the mission is so important to me that stepping outside my comfort zone, which is what I'm encouraging my audience to do a lot of the time, was just part of the journey. So yeah, it's been a journey, that's for sure.
Wow. I bet you many of our listeners can really relate to that feeling of when we become a parent ourselves and we see the possibility for harm or prevention, and we see the future in our children. And yeah, our focus becomes less individualistic and more focused on this collective well-being. And I'm so grateful that you listened to that inner call and that nudge from your husband to do this, because I am one of many, many parents who feels very unsure and unclear on how do we prevent harm from our children without creating fear. And that's something you and I talked about, approaching today's conversation without instilling fear, because that's
Yes.
not necessarily helpful
Yeah, yeah.
either.
And I'm
Yeah.
super big on this, that the research does tell us that parents need awareness in order to change. But what I'm
Right.
really mindful of in my content and what I share is I don't want to create fear, because I don't want children to not be able to have a normal part of childhood where they spend time with cousins and aunties. And, I really want all of that beautifulness and what you talk about, the village being a part of my children's life. And I don't want my
Yeah.
fear of what I know about the world, which is I know the worst of the worst and I see the worst of the worst, to then impact my children. And so, yeah, I'm really clear
Mm.
and mindful of the way I do it with my children. They don't know about sexual abuse. They don't know about harm, and they hopefully never will for a really long time. Instead, what they know is that their body belongs to them and they get to make choices that feel right. And so it's this real sense of empowerment around they get to make choices, and that's all I'm teaching them on. I'm not teaching them about all the stuff that we need to hold as parents. And yeah.
Yeah, to just pick up that piece around what we are holding as parents versus what our children have to hold. And then I'm just zooming back to what you were saying at the start. You kind of felt privileged in the sense that you could hold space for what could otherwise be triggering, or just no one has capacity for it, so they're not able to do that work. And I am curious, what have you found to be a way of resourcing yourself or supporting yourself? Because I'm sure that could be helpful for someone else to hear.
I don't know quite the right word for it, but I'm very I guess, connected to my world around me. And I meditate every morning for 20 minutes, like a non-negotiable for me, because I need that time just to come into myself and to quiet in my mind. And before the children wake up, it's like my little reset. And I find that that's super powerful. I also have supervision, which is really key. So in my work, I have to have a supervisor. I have two, sometimes three, that I connect in with. If there's something that comes up for me that I'm like, oh, this just feels too heavy, I need that support. I need to offload this. I'm also really mindful of boundaries, and it's something I teach in body safety education, and it's something that I hold very true. Like even today, I have an office that is separate from my house where I do this type of work, and then I have an office out where I see my clients. I'm just really like, I need to leave work at a certain place and come home and be mum, because I think that's really important. My children don't need a psychologist or a therapist or a prevention expert in their home. They just need mum. And so boundaries are a really important thing for me. And yeah, I have a wonderful husband who holds space for me as well. So I think that really works. I also like move my body a lot. I like to gym and walk and find joy with the children. Lots of, I guess, everyday things help me ground back and move and take off that therapist hat.
Yeah, and I appreciate you touching on that, even if they do feel like simple things. I know for so many people, including a past version of myself, that morning practice, which I now have
Yeah.
as a non-negotiable as well, was like a far distant thing that I felt would never be possible. And just so hearing you say that, my point is we need to tend to ourselves in these
Yeah.
ways, collectively with support from others and just knowing what we need. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for being
And I
honest
and I
about that.
so feel that to my core as well. Like I'm a yoga teacher. I've owned a yoga studio in the past. So I have like this connection to my well-being and taking care of myself. Meditation, for example, I've always known how beneficial it is for me, but it wasn't until I got to a point of like absolute rock bottom where I was like, I really have to change something here. And then when I introduced it, it just became I give to my children, I give to my clients, I give to my work. I need to give back. And so 20 minutes in the morning is actually a very small amount of time when I consider all the other giving that happens.
Yeah, it is. And yet so powerful, like you said. Okay, so thank you. And I would love to like hear from you as we hear on this podcast, like what your vision for the world is through the lens of what our children would inherit. So if you almost picture a magic wand, what world would you love our children to inherit from us?
Oh my goodness, what is such a beautiful question. I think if I had to put it at the highest level of my dream is that children never experience any form of sexual harm or sexual abuse. Yeah, the statistics are so incredibly high. Here in New Zealand where I live, we have 1 in 3 females and 1 in 6 males before the age of 18. And to me, that's absolutely devastating and heartbreaking. So my big dream would be to have no abuse happening, but I know what sits underneath that is that children are empowered in their body. They know that it belongs to them. They make choices that feel right for them. And I think that comes from parents or caregivers or adults in their world having those conversations that maybe they never had growing up, that stepping outside their comfort zone and really knowing that body safety education is no different to road safety education. We teach our children to look both ways. We say, hold our hand. Can you listen for any cars? Can you see anything? Whereas when it comes to how do we protect them for their body, a lot of the time we don't have lived experience. Like we never had parents that told us, okay, this is your body and this is how you keep it safe. And without that lived experience, it feels so like overwhelming or out of reach on how to do it. And then we also put in the aspect of it around like the taboo topics of sex or a child's body or autonomy, anatomically correct labels. They're almost like too frightening for people to talk about. And so, yeah, a world where parents felt confident to educate their child on their body would also be really amazing.
Yeah, and like a layer deeper beneath that is like, how would we as the adults, the village raising these kids, how would we relate to our own bodies?
Yes. Yeah, and that's a huge part of the work that I do with parents is I really encourage
Mm.
that self-reflection. How do you
Uh-huh.
feel about your body? How did you feel about your body when you were growing up? What
Mm.
sort of conversations did you have about your body? Because I think if we reflect and turn inwards, we actually find so much about how we then parent as well, or how we show up in the village. Because yeah, it's not like
Mm.
necessarily people, our parents or whoever supported us growing up, their fault, because what education did they have in this space? But it is like a deep reflection to help drive the change.
Yes, I'm hearing in that, like, bringing the unconscious to the conscious, and this is something my husband and I talk about often. It's like in times of stress, which happens often in parenting, like you default to like, this is just what you don't even think about it. You're just
Yeah.
defaulting to what was normal for you. So in bringing that self-reflection, it can help you see like, oh, my default may be to do this, but I would like to choose a different way. And another thing, and a question for you, I hear this quite a bit in the circles that I frequent, which is like this conversation around treating children as like human beings and not like second class
Yeah.
citizens or like that they, are not a human being yet. Like, what are your thoughts on that and what's your vision for how we would view children?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like viewing children as full human beings, for me as a mom, I'm really mindful to view my children in their wholeness, like the whole part of my child,
Mm.
not just the parts that are easy or not just the parts that society love about my children. I really try and view my child as the whole that they are. And I think when we do that, we can then provide the resources, provide the education that they need for who they are, rather than this is how it is. I'm going to tell you what to do. And particularly when it comes to a child's body, I really believe that they get to make choices that feel right for their body, not what we believe as adults. And there are definitely some limits I put in for my children, like for example, brushing their teeth or changing their nappy. Like those are things that have to happen, right? But can we do it in a way where a child still feels empowered? Like I'm not doing this to you, but you need to brush your
Right.
teeth. Do you want mama to do the first brush and then you do the second brush, or would you like to go first? Or what colored toothbrush do you want to use? What type of toothpaste do you want? You still need to do what I'm asking around your body, but let's make it fun. Like let's give the child a sense of control in that situation. So yeah, I am a really
Mm.
big believer on a child being, seen as a full whole human.
Mhm. Yeah, what comes to mind is just some scenarios, and I actually purchased some of the books I think you've recommended around these conversations, like going to the doctor, for example. That's on one spectrum where it's like, well, we need to go to the doctor, and the doctor may need to like check certain parts of our body. But I have memories even of going to the doctor, not feeling comfortable with this person. So it's like, how do we create a context of like you're still in charge around like the speed at which, or yeah, like how? Let's unpack that example even. Like,
Yeah,
how do we
amazing.
support our kids and the doctor?
Yeah, yeah. So the
Yeah.
doctors is a great one because it's that sense of like, how can we give autonomy in a situation where actually they don't have a huge sense of autonomy? So for
Mhm.
doctors, for me, I would always role play before I took my children there, so that I have a kids doctor's set, and I let them play with it. I might get out like a teddy and they can put the things in, listen, do all the bits. They might do it on me with my body and listen to like my heart, for example. So starting the role modeling, and I might in there as well ask questions. Like if I know that they've got a sore throat, I'll say, look, the doctor will need to look in your mouth. This is maybe what they'll do. So almost preempting what's going to happen, giving them the space to talk about it, ask questions if they need to. And then when you get to the doctor, just being really mindful, hey, we practice this at home. Do you need any help? Like, do you want to sit on mama's knee? Like as much reassurance as you possibly can. And I'm really big on when
Mm.
something's happening to a child's body that maybe they're a little bit uncomfortable with or they're not sure about, I use very clear communication. And the way I do it is I would say what's happening to their body. So right now, the doctor's going to take your temperature, why they're doing it. Like, mum has noticed that you're really hot at the moment, and we just want to see what's going on and if we need to give you any medication or
Mhm.
support. And then I'd say, do you have any questions? Like, is there anything I can do to make you feel more comfortable right now? And that's just saying to a
Mm.
child that something's happening to your body. You might be unsure. Here's what's actually going on. And it reinforces the idea that a safe adult will never just do something to a child's body, that the safe adult will
Mm.
give them information about it, what's going on. So they're really informed in the process. My children, for some reason, like love a doctor's visit. But yeah, I haven't had any issues yet, touch wood.
Yeah, and I do think, I mean, we have a great pediatrician who asks for consent before
Mm.
they check, but it's like not everyone may have that kind of care. I'm hearing like you're being this anchor for the child, this like safety spot
Yeah.
that they know like, okay, well, I'm safe here and this is what's happening. I'm not making up a story
Yes.
because I'm not sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, another question that came to mind in preparation for this was just thinking about the age. And, my husband and I talk about this all the time. Like, when do we start? Our oldest is now 3. Even when she was 2, we're like, when do we start talking about body parts, safe touch versus not safe touch? And like, how do we talk about that? And also now that there's more peer play and hanging out with other kids who are like 4 or 5, I've noticed in myself a fear of like, what are they going to introduce into the play scenario that I haven't equipped my daughter for
Yeah.
at this age? So you may want to speak to this from the different developmental stages that we
Yeah.
can meet in our
Yeah.
parenting. But yeah, how early and how are you addressing this at a
Yeah.
young age?
So I am an advocate for as early as you possibly can. I truly believe that there is no age limit on body safety education. And the reason that I'm so confident in that is because I'm not one to say that we have to sit down and have a conversation with a child about consent or this is your body, it always belongs to you. Like those conversations, yeah, they're fine. But I believe that body safety can just be part of our parenting and it can be so natural and it can be so normal because a lot of it comes through modeling and a lot of it comes through what we show our children and how we talk to our children about their body or about our body and boundaries. And so some examples of how I just make it really natural. I've done this with my children like since birth. Number one, and probably one of my biggest recommendations is using anatomically correct labels. And what I mean by this is words like penis and vulva, vagina. And the reason for this, I mean, there are so many reasons, but there's sort of like 3 key ones that I like to talk about. One is the stigma and shame that we create around a child's body because we just don't even use the language for what that part of their body's called. So we call a knee and an elbow, and then we might call like a vulva a fanny. And it just doesn't make sense because the message we give our children just from that very early onset is like, oh, we don't talk about that. Like we don't use the right word for that. And so if anything were to happen or they had any questions, it's not creating this really open, safe space to go, oh, actually, I might go and chat to mum or dad or auntie about this because is such a normal part of their body. And my daughter, we've always used those terms. And so I have a story of my daughter when she was 2. We went camping with my dad and they went down to the lake and she said, oh, Granddad, is there any sharks in there? Maybe she was almost 3. I can't quite remember, but she was young. And he said, no, there's no sharks, but if there was, they might bite your bottom. And she goes, oh, do you mean my vulva? And my dad was like, oh, your front,
Yeah.
your front bottom? And she's like, no, Granddad, that's called a vulva. And then like they laughed and they had a good time. Then they came back and my dad told me. And it was such a beautiful segue to start having the conversation with my dad as well, which was lovely. But also for my daughter, like that word is so normal. Like she has no idea that most adults say it and like kind of cringe in their stomach because for her, she's like, oh, it's part of my body. Like it's no different to my nose or my ears. Like that's my body.
Right.
And so I believe using the terminology is so good for reducing any form of stigma or shame and really creating an openness for our children to talk to us. And then from more of a prevention space, there's been interviews done with convicted sexual offenders towards children, and a lot of these people were pedophiles or they used grooming tactics. And they said that one of the biggest forms of deterrence towards harming a child was if they used the correct terminology for their body, because it indicated to them that these conversations were happening at home, that this is a child that's learnt about their body, and so it felt for them like a very risky child to harm. So from a prevention aspect, it's really good as well. And if something ever were to happen to your child, we need them to have the correct terminology for the legal system as well. I've worked with many children who haven't had the correct terminology, therefore it's impacted that legal process. So yeah, one of the number one ways that I've started weaving it into my child's life from a really young age is the anatomical languaging around their body. And then when it comes to things like body autonomy, I always let my children choose before they have physical contact. And so that happens with me. Like, I'll often ask for a hug, and I'm not perfect. Like, of course, there's times where my kids look really cute and you just have to pick them up and like squish them and stuff. But like, that's just, being a parent.
Right.
And I think there's like finding the balance. But my children always know that they can say no even if I went in for a hug and they didn't feel comfortable, they openly will say to me like no, or move away really confidently, knowing like I'm okay with that. But also that extends to the village, like aunties, uncles, grandparents, some of our friends. And the way that I do this is before anybody comes over to our house or before we leave, I'll say to my daughter, hey, remember that we're seeing Nanny today? She's going to come over. You get to choose how you say hello. And then once my mum arrives, I would say, oh, hi, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd say to my daughter, how would you like to say hi to Nanny? Would you like to give her a hug or a high five? Maybe you just want to wave. And what I'm doing in that moment is I'm creating like a really nice boundary for my daughter in front of my mum. And my mum obviously is on board and is aware of this, but I'm saying in that moment that she's going to decide how you both interact. And I think this is probably one of the most challenging aspects of body safety education, is putting in a boundary for our child when other people don't appreciate or acknowledge the importance of the
Right.
boundary. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then I get asked, how do I put that boundary in with family members that are a bit overbearing, or they just want the hugs and they don't believe in it?
Like they feel like, I just want to
Yeah.
add to that, what I feel is like a sense of entitlement
Mhm.
of like, you should give me a hug,
Mhm.
or you owe this to me
Mhm.
because we're family or whatever.
Yes.
This is what you do.
Yes.
Yeah, culturally.
Yeah, culturally, yeah, definitely. And like a sense of
Mm.
respect, like that's what you do for people
Yeah.
in your family. And if you
Yeah.
don't, then you're being rude or that. So how we do it and how we did it early on, I feel very lucky because this is what I do for a job. And so everybody's really respectful because they also know my
Right.
background. But this is how I recommend doing it is, again, it's the what. So we're letting our child decide how they greet people, why you're doing it. Oh, we're teaching them to listen to their body and do what feels right for them. And then you'd ask if they've got any questions, like, do you want to ask anything about it? Or like, is there anything that's sort of confusing to you? Because again, we want to open the conversations. Body safety isn't just within our homes, it really has to start rippling out to all of those other people. And so asking if they've got questions or if there's anything that they want to know more on is really important because it sparks those conversations.
Oh my God. I feel like this is revolutionary what you're saying, because I was just reflecting on this today. Like, I don't know if you've heard of the term the mommy wars, but it extends beyond just mommy wars. It's like there's like value systems that are at war with each other, whether it's intergenerationally or whatever. And it's like everyone wants to be right and no one wants to be made wrong. And I could feel around this conversation, amongst other things too, there's like a looking down on them, where like there's no space for that conversation because there's the shoulds. So
Yes, yes,
really, really appreciate you for bringing in this framework where it's actually the goal to have a conversation and open up and really offer to the other person, like, we should be talking about
yes.
this. I want to hear from you.
Yes.
Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I have a really good phrase that I use with my clients and in my own life when it comes to that sense of conflict around maybe values or beliefs. And it's a 2-sentence
Yeah.
structure that I use. And the first is I notice. So it might be, I
Right.
notice that you're not respecting our family's values around boundaries. So I notice is the first step. And then you always say, I wonder why you're doing that. Because I'm not coming at you like, you need to respect my boundaries. This is what's in my house. It's coming at it with curiosity. And I think when we bring curiosity into a conversation, we get so much more out of it than just, why aren't you doing this? You can't come to my house until you respect the boundaries. Like, I'm noticing your behavior. I'm noticing you're not respecting it, but why aren't you? Because then you can understand their point as well. So maybe that would be helpful in some of those other situations as well.
Mm. Well, yeah, because I feel like the energy of one is like there's a boundary there regardless, right? Of like, this isn't
Yeah.
working for us. But one feels more of like, I'm going to push you away,
Mm.
and the other one's feeling like I'm going to call you in, or I'm still committed to our relationship. Which again, from a village building lens, I often think about like, how do we weave village when we may not have the same points of view?
Yes.
So this is really helpful to just like boil it down to two two part
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there's more to say on kind of different relatives and other people in the village, but I do want to come back to this question around other children. Yeah, speak to us about the world of like creating body safety amongst children.
Yeah, great question. Because there is high likelihood that when if children experience sexual harm, that it does come from a peer, and
Yeah.
that often it can be more like in play and what might be more fun or funny, and then there are times where it is actually harmful, and there is quite a difference. For children, the work that I do in a prevention space sort of works with children under 8, and what we see in that space is a sense of curiosity around another child's body is actually very developmentally normal. So if children were to
Yeah.
play like show me yours, I'll show you mine, or they play doctors and maybe there's like conversations around private parts in there, that's actually very developmentally normal. And so one thing we don't want to do is like completely shame children for that kind of behavior. But what we want to do is use it as a teaching moment. So say there was children and they were playing like, I'll show you my, but if you show me yours, for example, you might say, hey, I overheard a conversation that you were having before, and I just want to have a chat about what parts of your body belong to you and what parts do we keep private to ourselves and why do we do that? So never bringing shame to it. Don't ever look at somebody's bottom. You can never do that. Again, it's that curiosity aspect that allows a conversation to happen, and it allows an openness that if anything were to happen, your child feels comfortable talking to you. So, yeah, I guess developmentally, there is a lot to that. I feel like we can't unpack all the developmentally normal behavior, but I think there is some there to sexual development, like that is part of life.
Yeah.
But when our children are engaging with other children, when it comes to things like consent, we want our child's boundaries to be respected just as much as we want them to respect someone else's boundaries. So the way that we teach consent in our house, in the hope that it ripples down to friends hanging out and like peer relationships, is we model consent. So that's things like asking before we have a hug. If my daughter's in the shower, I'll ask before I wash her body. When she hops out, I'll say, would you like to dry your body or would you like mama to do it? If we're playing a game like tickling or bouncing on the tramp and she says, no, stop, like I've had enough, I respect it right away. And these are all like tiny little moments of that consent, which she's learning and she's seeing from me. And then that, I hope, transfers into her knowing, okay, everybody that touches my body should ask, whether they're an adult and someone that's I love and trust, or they're a friend who I've just met at kindergarten. They still should have this to me because my parents have modeled to me that in order to come into my bubble, I need to ask and I need to feel safe and comfortable with that. So that's how I work to ensure my daughter feels safe with others. And then when I'm trying to encourage my daughter to have consent towards others, because she's just turned 4 and my son is coming up too, is I really encourage her to notice all aspects of the child she's interacting with. And what I mean by that is I'll encourage her to look at her brother's face. I say, what is his face doing right now? So maybe she's gone in for a hug. He feels completely like, get off me. And so I'd say to her, look at his face, darling. Like, is he smiling or is he frowning? And then I'd say, look what he's doing with his body. Like, is he pulling you in for a cuddle or is he pushing you away? And I said, what is he doing with his voice? Like, he doesn't talk a lot, but is he saying no? Or is he laughing? So I'm really encouraging her to also notice the boundaries within someone else, because that's going to support her in those peer interactions as well, that I need to respect somebody else's boundaries just like they need to respect mine.
Yes, totally resonate with that. I want to go back to what you were saying about the shame piece. I'll just share explicitly, like there was a situation where my daughter was playing with 2 of her friends and they like a lot of like wrestling tactile play and she doesn't. And they both were wrestling on top of her at the same time. And I turned around and I yelled, I was like, stop, get off. And then I realized like, oh, they're just playing. But my daughter looked panicked and it looked like she said stop and they didn't hear or they didn't listen. And so there was like a huge aftermath of that, right? Where as parents, we all came together and we debriefed. And one mom was like, I don't want to instill shame around what is normal developmentally. But I think like what that really highlights vulnerably for me is like, oh, I sometimes it's like a quick almost like animal
Yeah.
instinct to protect. And so what are some of these things that we need to almost just normalize? And I know we can't go cover everything developmentally, but I'm hearing like it's normal for children to be curious. It's normal for us to like want tactile play sometimes. And I'm hearing like it's also normal to say no and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
need space. Like, is there anything else in the normalization category that you
Yeah,
want to
I think
highlight?
it's also really normal for our children to not respect other children's boundaries and for our children's boundaries to
Yeah.
not be respected. I think that is a really normal
Yeah.
part of childhood, and that's where the learning happens, right? And like your example is perfect,
Mhm.
that maybe in that moment you felt like too elevated and too triggered to have the conversation, which is natural and normal as a mum. But maybe afterwards with your daughter, it could just be a conversation like, "Oh, darling, like I saw that you looked uncomfortable. And if that were to happen again, what could we do differently? Or what are some words that we could
Right.
use?" So, using those moments where you notice it to be a teaching moment. But I think normalizing that your child will cross a boundary and other children will cross your child's boundary is actually really normal as well, because they're always learning. Like, this is such a process, right? And even as adults, we cross people's
Right.
boundaries and are learning, and everybody's different
Mhm.
as well. I have a really good exercise that I do, and it's where I encourage clients or my daughter to walk towards me, and then I say, "Stop," when you're in my personal bubble, and my bubble might be a meter long, and then I'd get her to do it, and hers might be 2 meters long.
Mhm.
And so it's the idea that actually we're
Mhm.
also navigating everybody else's boundaries. Like, we're enforcing our own, but then everyone's can look really different. And so, like you say, the two girls might have been
Mhm.
really happy playing tactile type wrestling stuff, whereas for your daughter, her boundary is much wider than that. And so for two young children, figuring out one person's boundary is like, let's rough and tumble, and another person's boundary is like, no, that's too much. Like, that's a learning piece for children as well, that when we allow them to interact with their environment fully, they're going to learn as well.
Mm. Yeah, and I love that you're explaining this through the lens of play as well. Like, this is a game to play with. I'm learning a lot that like play is the way to teach our
Yes,
children.
yes,
Um,
yes,
so yeah, and I just want to clarify too in that example that was actually two boys with my daughter, and I think
oh,
that gendered piece as a
yes,
woman who's had my own experiences. Again, I
yes,
recognized and cleaned up with the adults like this was my own projection, and I really like checked in with each child afterwards. So that piece of repair
yeah.
after the heightened emotion being really key there. So thank you for just walking through that. So there's also something I've heard you talk about this before, and I'd love to break it down with you around how we create a safe space for our children so they can come to us should anything happen that made them feel uncomfortable and they can have those conversations.
Yeah.
So how do you lay that foundation?
Yeah. So I think all aspects of body safety lay that foundation, that if they have the knowledge, if they have these natural conversations or these natural moments where I'm checking in during play, like, is this still a fun game for you, or should we do something different? Or yeah, asking before I touch my children's body or dry their body after a shower. I truly believe it's these tiny little moments every day that teach my children you can talk to mum if you need to. And one sort of big thing that overrides
Mhm.
that is when we have capacity as parents or caregivers, we don't always have the capacity. I know personally I don't. But when my children come to me with something, I try and hold the space as best I possibly can, because it's saying to them, I'm listening, like, I'm here for you, I'm going to take this on board, so that we know if we listen in these little moments, then mum's going to listen in the big moments too. And what we want is that openness and
Mhm.
that sense of trustworthiness, that actually there's nothing I can't take to mum where she's not going to hold that space. And, as my children get older, I would
Mhm.
have that conversation like, mum and dad are always here. We will always listen. Like, there's nothing you can't tell me. But right now, they're too young for that. And instead, what they're doing is they're having experiences. I've hurt myself, I've done this. They come to me, I try my best to hold space if I have capacity, and that's like a little drop in the bucket to be like, yeah, mum's got me. So I believe there's that
Yeah.
that aspect of it, as well as just the ongoing everyday moments of education that show them, oh, this is a topic I can talk about. This is something I'm allowed to be curious about. I'm allowed to ask questions. Growing up,
Mm.
I never would have asked my parents, like, if I've heard something at school. I would have never been like, oh, what's that, mum? Like, that just wasn't a conversation at home where Like say somebody said, oh, something like a blowjob or something. I'd be like, oh my God, what is that word? Not go home and find out that information. And I think as parents, we really want to be that person for our children. We want to be the person they go to when they have questions or curiosities about their body or about intimacy, because we have the most accurate information that will support them to grow. So yeah, I think there's lots of factors, but holding space where you can, education are all really key.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that's kind of like I'm keep hearing from you that actually the small little pieces, like you said, the drops in the bucket go a long way. We're creating a relationship with our children where like this is what's normal. It's normal to talk about our bodies in this way. It's normal to ask for consent. And then in those bigger moments, like they will just kind of see it as another experience. Is that kind of how you're yeah. So when we look at like what we need to embody as parents or grandparents or aunties and uncles in this village, like what do we need to embody to really create this in the world? We've touched on like our own self-awareness, some of these practices of holding space. Is there anything else in the work that you do? Should someone say, I would like to work with Victoria more, like what does that journey look like?
Yeah. I think the self-awareness and the self-reflection is really, really important. And also the awareness of the dangers. And I don't speak to this all the time. And I don't talk about like the latest things in the news necessarily, because I believe that creates like a real alarming response and an urgency type response where actually if we come at this and just try to do little parts where we can, we don't need it to be perfect. Like our children don't, when we go to teach our children how to cross the road, we might miss out, oh, did you listen out for anything? And we don't like beat ourselves up for days because, oh, we didn't say the right thing. And I think when it comes to educating our children on their body, there's this real sense of like, I have to get it right. Like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I ruin them? Like, your children will forget if you say the wrong thing one time or if you miss one aspect of it out. So I think one thing is really to have kindness and to have grace in this process as well, particularly if you didn't learn it growing up, because it's not necessarily super comfortable and you will be stepping outside your comfort zone, using the term, say, like vulva in front of your extended family or aunties, uncles, people in your village that would never use that word. Like at the beginning, it will feel really uncomfortable. But if you can practice it, if you can be kind to yourself and be like, yeah, this is going to feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it anyway. Those are all really, really key parts to it. So, and working with me more, there's lots of different options, I guess. I have a lot of free resources online. So one thing, as we've spoken about, is weaving body safety into every day. And so I have a list on there. These resources are free of children's books that I highly recommend. They're all body safety structured, and you can order them. Most of them are from Amazon. So it's like a very simple process. And I find books are such a gentle and beautiful way to introduce the topic, not just for the children, but for also the parents or the adults in that village. And, say like parents buy it, but then the grandmother reads the book. It's almost like it's nicely introduced to everybody in a really gentle and safe way. And the books I've recommended, they're nothing like too in your face. There are some more that are for older children versus, say, younger children. But one of the books my daughter loves is Don't Hug Doug. And it's just a whole book about a boy that doesn't like hugs, but he likes high fives and he likes this. And it's just so normal and natural. So I have a recommended list for reading, and I also have body autonomy affirmation cards, and you can download them, and they've just got really simple statements that you can reinforce with your child about their body belonging to them. There are things that like we put around our daughter's mirror, or we might just flick through them at night, put one on the fridge. They're just this little reminder that actually you get to make choices that feel right for you. And again, they allow parents or caregivers to just make it a nice and natural conversation. And also, if your child is at an age where they're doing sleepovers or play dates, I created a checklist for that. Yeah. And so this has got questions that you can ask the host family. And if you get to the point where you think, okay, this actually doesn't feel right, I don't have all the answers I need, then I've put in there different ways that you can build the relationship, where maybe you are going to the park together and having a picnic. So you, as the parents or the caregivers supporting the child, are building that relationship. So then there will be the possibility of a play date in the future. So I'm not somebody that says no to play dates or sleepovers. I just need to ensure that all of the things are ticked off that list before it happens. So yeah, and often I run free workshops, and I also have an online program as well, where I educate parents on everything that I do with my children around weaving body safety education into their homes. Yeah, and that's called Foundations of Body Safety.
Oh my gosh, there's so many rich resources. I didn't even know about some of these. So thank you for listing that off and creating them to demystify some of this again. And, I think one thing we didn't touch on, but just curious if you have any thoughts or resources here, is just like, what do we do should something go wrong, quote unquote? Should there be like abuse, or even if it was playful in nature, but it like created harm for our children? Do you have thoughts on how we can manage that aftermath?
Yeah, definitely. So if you notice maybe a change in your child's behavior, or maybe your child has come and said something to you, it's this time where we want to
Mm,
ask questions that are open and curious, but they don't lead a conversation a certain way. So your child might say,
mm,
when I was playing at this person's house, this happened. You say, oh, can you tell me more? Oh, that's interesting. What
right.
happened next? So it's very open in the questioning that you're asking. You don't want to say, oh, did they do this? Did they do that? Then did this happen? Because we don't want
Right.
to put those ideas in a child's mind either. We really want it to be open and allow that conversation to sort of flow.
Mm,
Depending obviously on the level and the distress and the intent behind it, there is like a few processes, right? Like if it was sort of accidental, then maybe that's a conversation between two parents to unpack what's happened. Whereas if it is something quite serious, it would be reaching out to like local child protection services just to ensure that for that child to be engaging in that form of behavior, what's happening in their world? Do they need support in order to make sure that
mhm,
they are okay? And of course, if it's done by an
mm,
adult, then that
mm,
instantly needs to go to the police, as well as any child protection that needs
yeah,
to be put in place. And I always say, no matter what your child brings to you, just believe them, like really listen to them in those
mm,
moments, because we never want to say, oh, no, that didn't happen, or maybe you've got that a bit wrong, because that's really invalidating for a child and their experience. So hold the space, keep it really open, let whatever the child needs to say, and then as an adult, yeah, reaching out to the right support services. And in terms of reaching support in a therapeutic sense, I would be finding someone in my local area that specializes in children and
mm,
working with this type of abuse as well.
mm. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for covering that, because maybe nothing happens, right? But even knowing like, oh, this is how I would handle it should something happen, can kind
Yeah.
of quell some of that fear that, again, we don't want to project and create around
Yes.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, beautiful. I think, when I'm reflecting on everything you shared today, it all makes a lot of intuitive sense to me. I think one area that is still like a bit challenging, and my husband and I haven't figured out answers for, I wonder if others feel the same, is just this sense of private parts. You talked about anatomically correct words, right? But there's still this sense of like, oh, these parts of our body are private. I don't know if you would use that language, or how we talk about it again, without creating shame, but acknowledging like there's something different about this. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I find this one's probably one of the most trickiest questions to answer, because it's it's like it belongs to
Mhm.
you, but then every part of your body belongs to you. What makes this part particularly
Right.
belong to you, right?
For
Because
sure.
children are at this age too young to, know about sex or intimacy and that sort of thing. And so it is like a really mindful type of conversation. A lot of people ask me, oh, I shouldn't use the word private part, should I? And I think using the word
Mhm.
private part in conjunction with the right anatomically correct word is okay. So my daughter's very aware that that's her vulva and her vagina. But if we are doing something, I might say, "Oh, remember that that's your private part. So that's why we wear togs." So I can like interchange
Mhm.
between the two because I know she has the knowledge of what they are. So I wouldn't say like completely write off private parts. I would just be ensuring that my child has the education on what it actually is before I use that term. And then how I would explain it, I think it's around that those are the parts of your body that we keep private because they are special. They do belong only to you. Other people aren't to touch our private parts because they are yours. So yeah, I guess just making it really simple, and then developmentally as a child gets older and more curious, I would then have that conversation. And so like if my daughter is sitting on my knee and maybe like starts, might move her hand down my top, I might say, "Oh, please don't do that. Like mum's breasts are her private parts." And that again just
Yeah.
reinforces that actually we don't touch someone else's body and that they just belong to me. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I would do.
Yeah. Well, so what's coming up for me, maybe you have thoughts on this response, is like I've had that experience too where like my older daughter goes to touch, my breast or something. And I'm like, I don't want to be touched. Obviously, there's a general sense of like, this is my body, but also like, that's very sensitive. This
Yes.
is very sensitive to me.
Yes.
And so I think like for me, touching on the fact like that it does feel different versus like
Yes.
you touching my arm, like
Yes.
could maybe help create a framework for her that like, I don't know if she would notice that in her own body yet or not, but
Yeah.
yeah. What are your thoughts on that
Yeah,
approach?
great. I love the word that's a more sensitive part of mum's body. Like that's a really nice way of putting
Yeah.
it. And I'm really big on putting boundaries in for our own bodies in front of our children. So like my daughter
Yes.
and I were having a dance party the other day, and we danced together a lot and it was really fun. And then I just got to that point where I was like, "Oh no, I'm touched out and I had had enough." And so I said to her, like,
Yeah.
Mama would just like some space. Can we dance next to each other? I just would like to have my body to myself. And this is so important as part of this body safety work, because what we want is our children to see us putting in a boundary, because it gives them a permission slip to put in the boundary for their own body. They're like, "Oh, my mum, who I love and I look up to, she does this. So therefore, when I'm at kindy and maybe dancing with some friends and they get too close, I'm allowed to say, 'This is too close, please stop.'" And yeah, there might be times where our children are sick and things like that, and our boundaries are crossed more
Yeah.
than other times, and we allow that to happen. But in a general sense, it's important for our children to see people putting boundaries in for their bodies too.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you, Victoria, for covering all of these questions. I hope I speak for many, many listeners when I share some of the things that were top of mind and heart for me, because I think culturally, yeah, we just have a gap to close in terms of like what we normalize and how we show up for ourselves as well, as you're touching on. So
Yeah.
thank you for the work you're doing. I am excited to direct everyone to the resources you've mentioned. And I look forward to taking your course myself, because I feel like you just can't learn enough about this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful to be able to share this message and hopefully, I guess, inspire and empower some people in your village of listeners to make change and just start something small.
Exactly. Just start something small. It doesn't have to feel so big.
Yeah.
Okay, Victoria, thank you again.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you again for listening to this episode with Victoria. I hope that you found it to be as helpful as I did. And again, if you did get something from this episode, please share it with the other parents, aunties, uncles, grandparents in your village. My hope is that through sharing a resource like this one, we can make conversations like this easier and easier to have. And again, make sure to subscribe to This Is How We Care on YouTube if you want to get notified to when the shorter clips from this episode get released. Thank you again for being a part of our amazing listenership and for being someone that cares deeply enough about the kind of world that our children are inheriting. It's through conversations like this one and the ways that we embody these practices that we start to shift the kind of world that we leave behind. Thank you again. Take care.